There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace. It comes from being taught over and over that speaking won't change anything. She walked into that courtroom like she'd walked into so many rooms before. Already judged, already decided, already erased. No one asked why her lip was bleeding. No one asked what she had seen. They only saw a girl in cuffs and called her a threat before she even spoke. But beneath all that stillness, beneath the blank stares and unopened folders, there was something gathering, a weight she had carried for years. A storm held behind her eyes, steady and unshaken. And the moment he struck her, the moment the room chose to look away, that silence began to shift. Because this wasn't just about a trial. It was about what happens when the world tries to silence the wrong girl. So if you're ready, let me tell you what happened when Naomi Carter decided not to yell, but refused to disappear. There are courtrooms that smell like fresh paper and procedure. This wasn't one of them. Courtroom 6 of the Jefferson County Superior Court had peeling green walls, flickering lights, and a clock above the judge's bench that hadn't ticked in years. The kind of place that didn't need sound to feel heavy. Just sitting in the gallery was enough to feel like the truth had already been boxed and labeled before anyone took the stand. And then she walked in. Naomi Carter, 17 years old, 5'4", black, quiet, thin as a pencil line. She wore a Navy school hoodie zipped to her throat, but the dried blood at the corner of her mouth had already told a story the room didn't bother to read. Her hands were cuffed. She didn't cry. She didn't look for anyone in the crowd. She just walked with that strange, calm kids learn too early when the world keeps cornering them. They said she resisted arrest at a Greyhound station 3 nights earlier. Said she interfered with a lawful procedure. But what she had actually done, what got her dragged from a bus stop and shoved into a holding cell, was pull out her phone and press record. What Naomi caught on camera wasn't a protest or a fight. It wasn't even loud. It was a still image of Officer Seth Broderick forcing a homeless woman off a public bench, her face bloodied, her legs trembling without saying a word. There were no warnings, no commands, just force. And then Naomi's voice, off-screen, asking one soft question, "Why are you doing this?" For 47 seconds, the video lived online, before someone made sure she didn't. Now she sat in the coldest room in the city, hands chained, under the fluorescent judgment of people who would never ask what happened before she got there. To them, she was already the disruption, already the headline, already the kind of girl people whisper about in parking lots and pretend not to recognize. No family sat behind her, no sign of a mother or father, no news crew, no one with a clipboard waiting to defend her. Just a handful of tired citizens waiting for their traffic hearings and the bitter echo of shoes on linoleum. Broderick was there, though, sitting at the front, his posture too perfect, arms folded like the weight of his badge gave him permission to fold the truth with it. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't need to. His eyes were fixed on Naomi, like she was some stain he meant to scrub out of memory. The judge hadn't arrived yet, neither had the clerk, but the room already had a rhythm, the kind where justice wasn't blind, it was bored. Naomi's public defender, a man named Mark Phelps, whispered something to her without looking up. He hadn't asked her story, didn't request a delay. He just shuffled papers, trying to look prepared for a case nobody cared to prepare for. His fingers tapped nervously on an empty folder, the kind you carry when you've already decided how things end. She sat completely still. No fidgeting, no hair twirling, not even a glance around the courtroom. And somehow that made people even more uncomfortable, like they'd been robbed of the drama they were expecting. There were no tears to comfort, no outbursts to silence. Just a black girl who wouldn't give them the satisfaction of flinching. Behind her, in the last row of the gallery, a woman in a slate gray coat sat with a closed leather notebook in her lap. Her hair was tied back, no phone in hand, no purse on her shoulder. She didn't blink much, didn't react when Naomi entered, but something about her stillness felt deliberate, like a musician, waiting for the right note to join in. No one noticed her. That was the point. The bailiff finally entered, followed by the clerk, followed by Judge Henry Lowell, a man with a tired mustache and a mouth that curled down at the corners, even when he was quiet. He didn't look at Naomi, just nodded once at Broderick, who nodded back, like they'd just finished golf. The hearing began with a shrug, a name read flatly from a docket, a charge summarized in a breath, then the floor given to Broderick. He spoke in that slow, calculated rhythm police use when they want every syllable to sound like a footnote in a report. According to him, Naomi had interfered with a safety sweep, had refused to leave a restricted area, had escalated the situation. No one asked what restricted area meant when you're sitting at a bus stop. No one asked how a 17-year-old girl became a threat to a fully armed adult. No one asked why his report had no timestamp. Instead, the judge nodded again, and Naomi remained silent. She didn't argue. She didn't protest, not even when Broderick added the word combative. It wasn't until she licked her lip and winced that anyone remembered she was bleeding. Still, no one asked how. And that's when it landed, the weight of it all. The realization that Naomi wasn't just being judged for what she did, she was being erased for who she was. Like she had entered a room where innocence had an expiration date, and hers had been crossed out long ago. The woman in the back adjusted her watch. A quiet click, a gesture so soft it could have been accidental. But Naomi caught it, just barely. And for a split second, her eyes flicked toward the gallery. One breath, one twitch of attention. Then she returned to stillness. Because she knew the script. She'd seen it in movies, heard it whispered by teachers, felt it in every retail store where security watched her, but not the white boys stealing energy drinks. She knew what happened to girls like her who talked too loud, stood too tall, fought back too soon. They vanished, quietly, efficiently, without apology. So Naomi didn't resist. She let the silence swell. Let it wrap around the courtroom like smoke from a fire no one wanted to name. She didn't know yet who the woman in the gray coat was. Didn't know what waited behind her stillness. But she felt something stir beneath the weight of that room. And for the first time in her 17 years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt watched, not by power, but by something older, something waiting. And that, somehow, was enough. For now, the courtroom didn't make a sound when it happened. No gavel, no gasp, no warning. Just a hand, and then a slap. It wasn't loud not at first, but the sound of skin against skin always seems louder when it lands on someone who doesn't expect it. Naomi's head snapped sideways, her lip caught the edge of her own tooth, and blood returned like it had been waiting. No one moved. Not the judge. Not the bailiff. Not even Mark Phelps, who sat beside her blinking like he'd missed something important on a page that didn't exist. Officer Seth Broderick had crossed the room with the ease of someone who believed it belonged to him. He said nothing as he approached. Just leaned in, whispered something only Naomi could hear, and then struck her, sharp and clean across the face. And still, no one moved. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was policy. It was permission. Judge Lowell didn't raise an eyebrow. The clerk didn't look up. Ada Lauren Jensen didn't shift in her seat. It was as if Naomi had flinched for no reason, as if she had imagined the blow. As if the courtroom had collectively decided to ignore what had just occurred because acknowledging it would mean doing something about it. And nobody wanted to do anything about it. Naomi turned her head back slowly, her eyes searching for something solid to hold on to. But the walls were blank. The ceiling hummed. The floor was indifferent. Blood painted a thin line down her chin. She didn't touch it. Didn't wipe it. Didn't ask why. Instead, she lifted her cuffed handscom. Slow, deliberate, dabbed at the blood with the inside of her wrist. Then she turned to face Broderick again, her voice like smoke drifting across broken glass. "You just crossed the line." She didn't raise her tone, didn't try to threaten, she just said it. And for the first time since he walked in, Broderick took a step back. Not because someone ordered him to, But because something in her voice, measured, deliberate, certain, made him realize he had just done something irreversible. Not just a mistake, a choice. And Naomi didn't blink. Behind her, in the back row, the woman in the gray coat Evelyn Ross watched, with the stillness of someone who'd been waiting for that exact moment. She didn't gasp, didn't reach for her phone. She reached, instead, for a pen. A smooth, matte black pen with no logo and no clip. She began to write in her notebook, slowly, carefully, as if every word needed to land precisely where it belonged. Still, no one noticed her. But Naomi did. She could feel it, like the first breeze after a long drought. For most people, silence is awkward. For Naomi, it had become familiar. She had grown up in its shadow. The silence of being watched but not protected. The silence of being doubted when telling the truth. The silence of teachers correcting her tone but not the boys who interrupted her. The silence when her mom said, "You don't get to be loud, baby. You be right, but you be quiet." So Naomi had learned early. Keep your head down. Keep your answers short. And when something wrong happens, look down. Because sometimes, survival isn't about speaking. It's about knowing when your voice won't matter. But that was before today. Before this room. Before a slap in front of 20 people went unanswered because the person hit was a black girl with no power, and the person hitting her was a cop with a badge. Now, the silence felt different. Now, it felt like suffocation. Her attorney still hadn't said a word. He shifted in his seat, cleared his throat, adjusted a folder that held nothing, then leaned toward Naomi and whispered so low it barely moved the air between them. "Just hold tight. Don't escalate. Don't escalate." She wanted to laugh, but her throat closed around the sound. Escalate was the word they used when you cried too loud. Escalate was what they accused you of when your voice had too much pain in it. Escalate was how they made sure the damage done to you became your fault. And still, she said nothing. She folded her hands on her lap, blood still drying, and stared forward. And that courtroom, the one that ignored her breath, her skin, her pain settled again into its rhythm. Broderick returned to his seat like he hadn't just hit a child. Ada Jensen smoothed her blouse and crossed one leg over the other. Judge Lowell scratched something into a notepad without glancing up. And Naomi stayed still. Except her heart was screaming. Not for rescue, but for recognition. She remembered the woman on the bench at the bus station. The one who couldn't lift her own arms. The one who'd been shoved like she was trash. Not human. Naomi remembered the woman's eyes too tired to beg, too broken to resist. She had pulled out her phone not to be brave, not to go viral, not to fight the cops. She just didn't want that woman's last moment to go unseen. But in doing so, she had traded places with her. Now Naomi was the one bleeding in silence. Now Naomi was the one they ignored. And still, she didn't scream, because somewhere deep in the marrow of her bones, she knew. They wanted her to scream. They needed her to. Because once, she gave them the volume they could write her off. Emotional, aggressive, out of control. But if she didn't, if she just sat there, then they'd have to sit in it too. The silence, the weight, the truth. Behind her, Evelyn Ross turned the page in her notebook. Not quickly, not nervously, like she had all the time in the world. And for the first time in a long time, Naomi stopped trying to hold back her thoughts. She let them come. Why did he hit me? Why didn't anyone stop him? Why am I still sitting here like I deserve this? Why do I know the answer to all of those questions? Somewhere beneath all the rage, beneath the grief, beneath the secondhand shame and third-degree silence, a new question emerged. What if they think this is the end of the story? Naomi's lip burned. Her cheek throbbed, but her spine stayed straight. She wasn't crying. She wasn't trembling. And the room, every last soul in it, was still pretending none of it had happened. And yet, Something had changed. It wasn't in the judge. It wasn't in the prosecutor. It was in the stillness. In the woman with the notebook. In the scratch of pen on paper that no one else could hear. And in Naomi's own chest tight, cracked, but still beating. This was not the end. She didn't know what came next. But she knew what wouldn't. She would not be invisible anymore. Even if her voice didn't fill the room, her silence would. It didn't begin with a bang. It began with the turning of a page. The sound was small, just paper shifting across leather, but somehow it sliced through the silence like a match striking in a cave. Evelyn Ross turned one more page in her notebook, then quietly closed it, and stood. No announcement, no raised hand, no declaration of objection. She simply rose from her seat at the back of the courtroom, smoothed her coat at the hem, and began to walk. Her heels tapped the tile with quiet, deliberate rhythm. 2, 3. Each step like a countdown no one realized had started. Heads turned slowly. Not because she drew attention to herself, but because the weight of her movement made them notice. Even the bailiff sat up straighter. Judge Lowell squinted. Ada Jensen tilted her head, confused. Evelyn walked to the center aisle and stopped not in front of the bench, not at the podium, but squarely between Naomi and the gallery. She opened the front of her coat and reached inside. A ripple moved through the room, the kind that travels across skin before the mind understands why, the kind that says something is happening, and it cannot be undone. When Evelyn's hand emerged, it held a black leather case compact, square, sealed with a federal crest. She opened it slowly. No rush, no drama. Inside, under courtroom light, shimmered a badge no one expected. United States Department of Justice, Office of Civil Rights Oversight, Field Inspector, Retired Active Clearance. And just like that, the courtroom stopped pretending. Gasps were muffled behind fingers. Chairs shifted. The judge leaned forward, uncertain. For a full second, Ada Jensen didn't move at all. Evelyn's voice was soft, but it carried with the weight of years behind it. Evelyn Ross, former Federal Oversight Inspector, credential 84022. I am here under Article 7, advisory capacity and observation jurisdiction. No one moved to stop her. No one knew how. She turned to the bench. I filed a federal complaint on the handling of this case under the Emergency Bypass Review Protocol. The documentation was received at 6:14 this morning. Judge Lowell, your recusal has been requested. Judge Lowell blinked. Actually blinked. As if waking up from a sleep he didn't know he was in. I'm sorry. Under whose authority? Evelyn didn't flinch. The Office of Civil Rights Oversight. You've seen the signature. She reached into her bag and retrieved a thin manila folder. Then she began to read. 3 years ago, Officer Seth Broderick was the subject of 2 citizen complaints involving minors, both black-owned, resulting in hospitalization. No charges filed. She turned the page. Ada Lauren Jensen declined to prosecute both cases, citing insufficient body cam evidence, despite video from bystanders submitted within 3 hours of incident. Another page. Last year, Broderick's testimony resulted in the expulsion of a 14-year-old student from Jefferson Prep. The family filed an appeal. No review granted. Page after page. Her voice never rose. But every syllable landed like a stone on ice. Cold. Sharp. Cracking what had once felt solid. Naomi didn't look at her. She didn't have to. She could feel the room shift not toward her, but around her, like walls adjusting to make space for a truth that could no longer be pushed aside. Phelps, her attorney, opened his mouth for the first time all day, but no words came out. The judge tried to interrupt. Miss Ross, this isn't a federal hearing. Evelyn raised a single eyebrow. No, Judge, but it's about to become one. She placed the final page on the clerk's desk. Its seal glinted under the light. A federal summons. Issued that morning, signed by Chief Regional Counsel. An order for full internal review. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. The courtroom air thickened. Even Broderick shifted in his seat. And then, without being asked, the side door opened. Two men entered. No uniforms, no guns, just suits, quiet authority. They moved with the unbothered grace of people who didn't need to prove anything. One walked toward Broderick, the other toward Jensen. The judge opened his mouth again, but Evelyn cut him off not with volume, but with certainty. You sat through a physical assault in your courtroom and did nothing. You let a child bleed on your watch. You let silence become law. Her eyes didn't narrow. Her jaw didn't clench. She simply turned to Naomi. And for the first time that morning, the girl looked up. The connection wasn't warm. It wasn't emotional. It was something deeper. Recognition. Not of title, not of authority, but of something harder to find. Witnessing. Naomi had been seen. Fully. Evelyn didn't nod, didn't smile. She simply spoke once more. Silence can bury truth, but it can also hold it still long enough to carve it in stone. And that's when Broderick stood. Not to fight, not to run, but because the man beside him gently touched his elbow. And the weight of that small gesture silent and final said everything that needed to be said. The courtroom didn't applaud. It didn't cheer. It held its breath, as if afraid that any sound would wake the room back into the lie it had lived for too long. As Broderick was escorted through the doors, his eyes met Naomi's just once. There was no apology. No shame. Only confusion. How did this happen? How did silence win? But Naomi didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't gloat. She simply sat, wrists still cuffed, blood still dry on her face, watching the world try to catch up to what it had almost destroyed. The gallery remained still. Not frozen, not afraid, but stunned. Because something had happened here that most people spend lifetimes waiting for. A system cracked, and through the fracture, the truth walked in. The cuffs came off, but the silence stayed. Naomi flexed her wrists only once, slow and quiet, like someone waking from a dream she had no part in designing. The skin beneath the metal was raw, bruised in a perfect circle where restraint had marked her. No one offered her a tissue. No one asked if she was okay. Not the judge, not the bailiff, not the attorney who'd sat beside her for 2 hours without speaking her name out loud. They simply returned to their seats, adjusted their papers, and pretended that what just happened had been procedure, not exposure. But the truth had been named, and no one knew what to do with it. Naomi reached down to the floor, where her backpack lay open, half spilled from earlier. No one had picked up what had fallen out. It still sat there, the sandwich wrapped in foil, the notebook with the corner bent, the pencil pouch split open like someone had been searching for a weapon that didn't exist. She knelt without a word and began to gather herself, one item at a time. Not to prove a point, not to make a statement, just because they were hers. The sandwich went in first. She rewrapped it as best she could, smoothing the foil with fingers that trembled only once. Then the papers. Some were class notes. One was a drawing unfinished of a sunflower half blown by wind. She placed that between the notebook pages carefully, aligning the spine with the edge. It wasn't a performance. It was reclamation. The kind you don't do for cameras, but for your own bones. The pencil pouch followed. Then the photograph creased, and Celintoff, her mother, smiling on a porch Naomi hadn't seen since she was 10. By the time she zipped the bag, the courtroom had shifted from tension to discomfort. No one dared interrupt her. Even Evelyn Ross remained seated now, hands clasped in her lap, eyes locked on Naomi like the next move belonged entirely to the girl who hadn't spoken all morning. And it did. Naomi stood. Not dramatically, not slowly, just with purpose. She didn't look to the bench, didn't search for permission. She walked to the clerk's table, placed her backpack gently beside it, and turned to face the front of the room. The judge blinked again, then cleared his throat. But before he could speak, Naomi did. Her voice wasn't loud, It didn't need to be. Why do you think I didn't fight back? It wasn't a challenge. It was a question wrapped in decades of restraint. Nobody answered. The silence that had once been her prison was now her weapon. She glanced at her attorney, then at the ADA, then at the judge. I didn't fight back because I wasn't raised to win like that. A pause. Heavy. Then she added, soft as wind through glass. I was raised to know the difference between power and control. She didn't wait for them to react. She didn't need their affirmation. Naomi walked back to her seat, sat, folded her hands, and simply existed. But she didn't look small anymore. She looked undeniable. Behind her, Evelyn Ross finally smiled, but it was the kind of smile you give when you know something sacred has survived, something unspeakable. The courtroom, meanwhile, shuffled to life again. Procedures resumed. Motions were filed, and yet every action that followed felt out of place, like trying to continue a meal after an earthquake. The judge read from his notes, but his voice was thinner now. He granted a recess. Not because the court needed it, but because he did. As the courtroom emptied, Naomi remained seated. Evelyn didn't move either. People passed them like waves around two rocks that would not budge. Outside the window, snow had started to fall, the kind that doesn't stick just, lingers long enough to make people look up. Naomi's hand rested on the backpack, now zipped and whole again. She didn't fidget, didn't check her phone, didn't ask Evelyn for answers. But the silence between them had changed. It wasn't the silence of survival anymore. It was the silence of strength. Evelyn finally spoke. Not loudly, not formally, just enough for Naomi to hear. They wanted you loud, because that's easier to erase. Naomi turned her head slightly, met her eyes, and nodded once, then looked away again. Not out of avoidance, but because she already understood. Some truths don't need repeating. Some dignity doesn't need defense. It just needs space. And for the first time in a long time, she had it. They didn't rename the courtroom with a ceremony. There were no cameras, no speeches, no plaque unveiling. Just a quiet maintenance worker on a Tuesday morning, replacing the small, dented placard above the courtroom door. The new one read, Ross Carter Hearing Room, for every voice that was never heard. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a quiet correction, one that felt more like a promise than a headline. Inside, the lights had been changed, the flickering overheads replaced with soft, even beams. The old broken clock above the bench still hadn't been fixed, but now someone had cleaned the dust off it. As if the room, too, had decided to stop pretending. Naomi didn't come back for the renaming. She wasn't even told it had happened. She found out 2 weeks later when her classmate handed her a folded school bulletin with a small paragraph at the bottom. Courtroom 6 has been rededicated in honor of Evelyn Ross and Naomi Carter, whose actions sparked a citywide investigation into police misconduct and judicial oversight. That was all. No photos. No signatures. No fanfare. She stared at the line for a long time before folding the page back into her bag, and kept walking. The first day at her new school, Naomi arrived 20 minutes early. Not because she was nervous, but because she needed time to remember how to just enter a room. The hallway was quiet. Lockers lined up in uniform stillness, students trickling in one by one, unaware of the weight she carried behind her eyes. Her backpack felt heavier than it was, not from books, but from the memory of what had been pulled out of it, scattered, judged, violated, then forgotten by everyone but her. She walked slowly, watching the tiles pass under her feet like they were measuring something only she could feel. In a corner near the science wing, a girl with freckles and braids sat alone, flipping through a thick textbook. She looked up, met Naomi's eyes, and without a word, slid her backpack off the seat beside her. Naomi sat. No one clapped. No one whispered. But the silence this time didn't feel like judgment. It felt like space. That afternoon, a video began quietly spreading across social media. It didn't have music, no narration, just slow, uncut footage, stitched together by someone in the gallery the day Naomi stood her ground. The first frame, Naomi entering the courtroom in cuffs. The next, her flinchless silence after the slap. Then Evelyn Ross standing. The badge. The folder. The arrest. And finally, Naomi, packing her things, alone. The caption beneath the last shot read, "Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it just refuses to disappear." Within 48 hours, the clip reached over 6 million views. By the end of the week, teachers were quoting her in classrooms. One public library printed her words and posted them on the wall above the biography section. "I wasn't raised to win like that." A mural appeared 3 blocks from the courthouse. Naomi's silhouette, arm outstretched like a shield, standing between a nameless officer and a trembling woman. She never posed for it, never signed it. But someone painted her anyway, and nobody painted the judge. In the courthouse, the aftershocks kept coming. Ada Jensen resigned 2 days after the video aired. No press conference, just a name quietly removed from the directory. Judge Lowell took a 2-month leave of absence. When he returned, his docket was limited to civil filings. No criminal cases, no public hearings. He didn't contest it. He didn't have to. The silence around him did the work. As for Broderick, he never returned to duty. Internal Affairs began a full audit of every arrest he had processed in the past 5 years. No charges were filed yet. But people remembered now. And remembering was its own kind of justice. Evelyn Ross returned to her home on the east side of the city. She didn't give interviews, didn't respond to inquiries. But every Sunday morning, she opened the blinds in her front window and sat with a cup of tea beside her notebook. She never filled it again. Didn't need to. It had already done what it came to do. And Naomi? She didn't post a statement, didn't tweet, didn't go live. But she showed up, day after day. She sat in classrooms, took notes, laughed quietly when the kid behind her told a bad joke. One day, during English, the teacher asked if anyone wanted to read their personal essay aloud. Naomi raised her hand. The room went still. And when she spoke, her voice didn't tremble. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. She read, "I don't think dignity shouts. I think it waits. And when the noise is gone, it's what remains." No one applauded. But no one forgot. Months later, a small sign appeared on the lawn outside the Jefferson County Courthouse. It wasn't big. Just a wooden stake with white paint and 7 hand-lettered words. The day silence stood up for itself. No one claimed it. But no one removed it either. Because by then, people had learned some moments don't need permission. They just need to happen. One morning, as winter finally gave way to spring, Naomi stood outside the courthouse not to return, but just to see. The sun hit the sidewalk just right. The air was light. She didn't speak, didn't reach for her phone. She just looked up at the building that once swallowed her whole. And didn't flinch. Because now the walls knew her name. And the silence? The silence knew better than to try again. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one carrying the heaviest truth. Naomi never yelled. She never raised her voice. But somehow her silence echoed louder than anything that tried to erase her. And it makes you wonder, have you ever been in a room where your voice didn't seem to matter? Where the truth inside you felt too heavy to name, too sacred to shout? If you've ever sat still when the world expected you to break, know this. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. And silence does not mean surrender. Because every time someone like Naomi refuses to disappear, every time dignity chooses presence over performance, something shifts. Maybe not all at once, but quietly, steadily, permanently. So if this story moved you even a little, take a moment to let it breathe. Then share it with someone who might need to remember they're not alone in their stillness. And if you haven't yet, I invite you to subscribe to this channel for more stories like this, stories that hold space for pain, for power, and for possibility. Leave a comment. Let us know. What part of this story stayed with you? Or maybe, what story do you still carry in silence? Because sometimes the most important truths aren't shouted from a podium. They're whispered by someone who simply stayed. You don't need to raise your voice to raise the standard. See you in the next story. Stay tuned.